The stadium was alive with noise, thousands of voices merging into one electric roar. Lights swept across the crowd. The band played on, and Michael Jackson stood at the edge of the stage, closer to the audience than usual. This was the moment fans waited for. A glance, a wave, a single step toward them. Then, cutting through the excitement, a voice shouted something no one expected. "Watch out! He's dangerous." The words didn't sound like admiration. They sounded like fear. For a split second, everything fell off. Security stiffened. Fans near the voice turned their heads in confusion. Some laughed nervously, unsure it was a joke or a warning. Michael heard it. He stopped moving. The music continued, but his focus locked onto the crowd. Slowly, deliberately, he turned toward the direction of the scream. The smile faded from his face. His expression shifted, alert, serious, deeply attentive. Most people expected the obvious next step. Security rushing in, the fan being removed, the moment erased as quickly as possible. But Michael Jackson didn't step back. He stepped forward. What happened next lasted only a few seconds, but it changed the atmosphere of the entire arena. It revealed something about Michael that no rehearsal, no choreography, and no public image had ever shown. Why did the fan call him dangerous? What did Michael see that everyone else missed? And why did his reaction leave the crowd completely silent? Stay with this story, because the truth behind that shout and what Michael did in response will challenge everything you think you know about fear, misunderstanding, and the man behind the legend. The concert had been flawless up to that moment. The lights moved in perfect synchronization with the music, sweeping over the sea of raised hands like waves of electricity. Michael Jackson stood near the front edge of the stage, sweat glistening on his forehead, his breathing steady despite the intensity of performance. He had done this thousands of times, in cities all over the world, but this night felt different. The crowd was closer than usual. The energy was louder, heavier, almost restless. Michael felt it in his chest. As the song reached its final notes, he stepped forward, instinctively drawn toward the audience. He always was. No matter how many barriers or guards stood between him and the fans, he felt safest when he could see their faces. When the distance disappeared, even for a second, the music softened, the lights dimmed. That was when the voice broke through. "Watch out! He's dangerous." It wasn't a scream of excitement. It wasn't playful. It wasn't admiration. It was sharp, urgent, afraid. The words cut straight through the noise, so clear that people nearby froze, unsure what they had just heard. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Some fans laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. Others turned toward the sound, scanning faces in the darkness. Michael heard it instantly. Years of performing had trained his ears to pick out individual sounds from chaos. He could hear a child crying 3 rows back. He could hear someone whisper his name behind a barrier. And now, he could hear fear in a single voice. He stopped, not dramatically, not suddenly enough to cause alarm, but enough that the dancers behind him noticed. His foot hovered just above the stage floor for a fraction of a second before settling back down. The band continued playing, unaware that something had shifted. Michael turned his head slowly toward the crowd. Security noticed immediately. Their posture changed. Radios crackled softly at their belts. A few guards began moving closer to the edge of the stage, eyes scanning for the source of the shout. But Michael didn't signal for them. His face, once open and smiling, became focused. Not angry, not afraid. Focused, like a man listening very carefully to something no one else could hear. He raised one hand. The band caught it. The music faded into a low hum, then stopped entirely. Silence fell over the arena. Not the comfortable silence of anticipation, but the heavy, uncertain kind that presses against your ears. Thousands of people held their breath at once. Michael stepped closer to the edge of the stage. Security tensed, ready to intervene, but he shook his head slightly. Just enough to say no. Just enough to say, "Trust me." "Who said that?" he asked. His voice carried without effort, soft but clear, floating across the first rows and into the darkness beyond. There was no accusation in his tone, no irritation, only curiosity and something else. Concern. For a moment, No one answered. Fans exchanged glances. Some pointed vaguely. Others shook their heads, afraid to be associated with the interruption. The crowd buzzed with whispers. Then, from near the front barrier, a hand slowly rose. A woman stood there, frozen in place, her eyes wide. She looked like she hadn't meant to raise her hand at all, as if her body had betrayed her before her mind could stop it. Michael saw her immediately. He pointed gently. "You," he said, "can you tell me why you said that?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in. The woman's face appeared on the giant screen behind the stage, pale, tense, her lips trembling. She swallowed hard. I didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice shaking. "I wasn't trying to be rude." Michael nodded slowly. "I know," he said. That response surprised people. He hadn't asked her to explain herself. He hadn't defended himself. He hadn't shown offense. He had shown understanding. The woman took a breath, her hands gripping the barrier. "I said it because every time someone gets close to you, something bad happens," she said. "People get hurt. You get hurt. I thought you were in danger." The arena went quiet again, but this time it was different. The fear in her voice was unmistakable. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger, not embarrassment, recognition. He had heard versions of this fear his entire life. From managers, from security, from family members, from strangers who believed danger followed him like a shadow. Not because he caused it, but because the world around him reacted to him in unpredictable ways. He crouched down at the edge of the stage, lowering himself so he was closer to her eye level. Security shifted nervously, but again he motioned them back. "Thank you for saying that," he said. The woman blinked, confused. "You're not mad?" "No," Michael replied quietly. "You were trying to protect me." The crowd stirred. People leaned forward. Phones rose into the air. Michael looked out over the audience, his gaze sweeping across thousands of faces. "Sometimes," he said, "people think danger comes from the person standing here." He tapped his chest once. "But that's not always true." He turned back to the woman. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded, barely breathing. "Were you afraid of me?" he asked. "Or afraid for me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "For you," she whispered. "Always for you." Michael closed his eyes for a brief second. In that silence, between the question and the answer, something invisible shifted. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't scream. They listened. Michael stood slowly, his posture straight but gentle. "Then you didn't say anything wrong," he said. "You said something honest." He extended one gloved hand toward her, not to touch, not to pull her closer, but as a gesture of acknowledgement. "Danger," he continued, his voice steady, "isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in misunderstanding. Sometimes it hides in fear." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And sometimes," he said softly, "the most dangerous thing is silence." The arena remained still. No one knew yet what would happen next. But everyone understood one thing clearly. This wasn't a disruption anymore. This was a moment. And Michael Jackson was about to turn into something no one would ever forget. Michael remained standing at the edge of the stage, his hand still extended for a moment longer before he slowly lowered it. The arena was silent in a way that felt almost unreal, as if thousands of people were afraid that any sound might break whatever fragile truth had just been spoken. The woman near the barrier wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked embarrassed now, as if the weight of the attention had suddenly fallen on her all at once. "I didn't mean to stop the show," she said quickly. "I swear, when I saw you come closer, something in my chest panicked." Michael nodded, listening with the same intensity he once reserved for studio sessions, when every note mattered. "What did you feel?" he asked. She hesitated. Cameras zoomed in tighter. The giant screen captured every tremor in her face. "I felt like history was repeating itself," she said. "Every time you trust the crowd, every time you let your guard down, something bad happens. People grab, people scream, people forget you're human." A murmur rolled through the audience, uncomfortable agreement mixed with unease. Michael exhaled slowly. "You're right," he said. "They forget." Security glanced at one another. This was not a conversation they were trained for. "When you shouted," Michael continued, "did you think I was dangerous, or did you think the situation was?" "The situation," she answered immediately. "Never you." That answer hit harder than applause ever could. Michael straightened and turned his body slightly toward the rest of the crowd, though his eyes never fully left her. "I want everyone to hear this," he said, "because what she's saying isn't new. It's just usually said in whispers." He took a step back, giving himself space, then looked out across the arena. "People have been afraid around me my whole life," he said. "Afraid of what I represent. Afraid of what might happen. Afraid of the reaction I cause just by existing." The crowd stayed quiet. "When I was a child," Michael went on, his voice steady but distant, "adults told me I was powerful. Not because I wanted to be, but because people reacted strongly to me. And when people react strongly, things can get dangerous." The woman's breathing slowed as she listened. She hadn't expected this. None of them had. Michael turned back to her. "You didn't scream because you were afraid of me," he said. "You screamed because you were afraid for me. That's different." She nodded, tears rolling freely now. "But here's the truth," Michael said gently. "I can't live my life only protecting myself. And I don't want to live my life hiding from love." A few people in the crowd wiped their eyes. Others clasped their hands together, unsure why their throats felt tight. Michael crouched again, resting one hand on his knee. "Tell me something," he said softly. "When you look at me, what do you see?" She swallowed. "A man who gives everything," she said. "Sometimes too much." Michael smiled faintly. "That part is true." He looked away for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "But what you saw just now, me stepping closer, that wasn't recklessness," he said. "That was trust." The word echoed in the air. "Trust is risky," Michael continued. "But it's also the only thing that makes this—" He gestured to the arena, the lights, the thousands of faces, real. He stood and faced the audience fully now. "Security can protect my body," he said, "but only love can protect my spirit." The crowd erupted, not into screaming, but into applause. Slow at first, respectful, then stronger, fuller, until the sound filled every corner of the arena. Michael waited for it to fade. When it did, he raised one finger. "But," he added, "that doesn't mean we ignore fear. Fear is information." He turned back to the woman. "Your fear came from care," he said, "and care deserves respect." He signaled to a member of security near the stage. The guard leaned in, clearly confused. "It's okay," Michael said quietly. "She stays." Gasps rippled through the front rows. The woman's eyes widened. I don't want trouble," she said. "There is no trouble," Michael replied. "There's honesty." He stepped closer, still maintaining distance, still careful. "I want you to stay right where you are," he said. "I want you to see the rest of the show. And I want you to know something." He leaned in just enough that his voice lowered, though microphone still carried it. "You didn't put me in danger," he said. "You reminded me that people are watching, not just a performer, but the person." The woman nodded, overwhelmed. Michael straightened and turned back toward the band. He lifted his hand again, not to stop this time, but to begin. Before the music started, he spoke one last sentence. "If we're going to be loud tonight," he said, "let's be loud with care." The band began to play, but something had changed. The music sounded the same. The choreography was flawless. The lights were brilliant, but the air felt different, lighter, more intentional, as if everyone in the arena understood that this wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a shared responsibility. And somewhere near the front barrier, a woman who had shouted in fear now stood with her hands over her heart, realizing she hadn't interrupted history. She had become part of it. As the music filled the arena again, something subtle but unmistakable shifted in the crowd. The screams returned, but they were different now, less frantic, more intentional. People were no longer shouting just to be heard. They were listening. Michael moved across the stage with his familiar grace, but there was a new restraint in his steps, as if every movement carried added meaning. He sang, he danced, he performed, but he also watched. His eyes scanned the audience not like a superstar feeding off applause, but like a human being reading a room. The woman near the barrier remained still, her gaze locked on him. She no longer looked afraid. She looked awake. During the next song, Michael approached the edge of the stage again. This time, there was no sudden gasp, no tightening of security grips. Instead, the crowd instinctively leaned back, creating space without being asked. Michael noticed. He pointed gently toward them, then placed a hand over his heart in thanks. This moment, this unspoken cooperation, was something he had rarely experienced. For years, crowds surged forward without thinking, driven by adrenaline and obsession. Tonight, they were aware. Between songs, Michael spoke again. "You know," he said, his voice calm but caring, "people think danger always looks loud, violent, obvious. But most danger comes from forgetting." The arena quieted immediately. "Forgetting that the person on this stage gets tired," he continued. "Forgetting that I feel pain. Forgetting that I could be scared too." He paused. "When that happens," Michael said, "even love can become dangerous." The words settled heavily. He glanced again toward the woman who had shouted earlier. "She didn't forget," he said. "That's why she spoke." A wave of understanding moved through the audience. Heads nodded. Hands lowered. Phones stopped recording. Michael turned slightly toward the band, signaling them to soften the music beneath his voice. "I've been protected my whole life," he said. "By walls, by guards, by distance. But those things don't protect the soul." He stepped closer to the edge again, slowly, deliberately. "What protects the soul," he said, "is when people choose care over chaos." He knelt, not in submission, but in connection, bringing himself to eye level with the front rows. "I don't need you to be quiet," Michael said. "I need you to be present." The crowd responded not with screams, but with a unified hum of approval, applause mixed with reverence. For the first time that night, Michael smiled fully. He stood and transitioned seamlessly back into performance. But the energy had transformed. The crowd followed his cues intuitively now. When he leaned forward, they leaned back. When he reached out, they reached emotionally, not physically. Backstage, members of the crew exchanged glances of disbelief. They had worked hundreds of shows, thousands of crowds, but they had never seen this level of synchronization between performer and audience. One of the security supervisors leaned toward another. "I've never seen him do this," he whispered. "He's not controlling the crowd. He's teaching them." On stage, Michael felt it too, during a brief instrumental break. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't Michael Jackson, the icon. He was just Michael, breathing, grounded, safe. That feeling was rare. He opened his eyes and spoke again, quieter this time. "I want to tell you something I don't usually say out loud," he said. "Sometimes I'm afraid of how much people love me." A hush fell instantly. "Not because I don't appreciate it," he added quickly, "but because love without awareness can crush the thing it wants to protect." The woman near the barrier pressed her hand to her mouth. Michael nodded, as if confirming something for himself. "Tonight," he said, "you show me something different. You show me that love can also listen." He gestured gently toward the audience. "That's powerful." As the next song began, its lyrics took on new meaning. Lines about trust, fear, and humanity resonated deeper, as if written for this exact moment. People sang along, but softer, more connected. Tears ran freely now, unashamed. Michael moved with less force and more fluidity, as though the weight he usually carried had eased, even if only temporarily. At the song's end, he bowed, not the theatrical bow he perfected over decades, but a small, sincere one. "Thank you," he said simply. The applause that followed was thunderous, but controlled. It was not demand. It was gratitude. Michael stepped back, preparing for the next part of the show, but he paused once more. To the woman who spoke up, he said, meeting her eyes across the distance, "You didn't ruin anything." He smiled softly. "You protected it." The lights dimmed slightly as the band prepared to transition again. And in that moment, the entire arena understood something they would never forget. That night wasn't remembered because a fan shouted in fear. It was remembered because everyone chose to respond with care. And for Michael Jackson, that choice meant more than applause ever could. The stage lights dimmed until the arena was bathed in a deep, electric blue. A soft instrumental filled the space. Slower now, almost fragile. Michael stood alone at center stage, his silhouette outlined against the glow, head slightly bowed. The crowd sensed it instantly. This was not just another part of the show. This was a turning point. Michael lifted the microphone again, but he didn't sing. Not yet. There's something I need to explain, he said quietly. His voice, calm and unguarded, carried farther than any scream ever could. When you're up here, he continued, gesturing around him, you learn to read energy, fear, excitement, love, sometimes confusion. He paused, choosing his words carefully. A few minutes ago, someone yelled something that sounded strange, even frightening. He glanced toward the audience, not accusatory, just reflective. But what she said came from awareness, not hate. The arena remained completely silent. Tens of thousands of people, silent. Michael took a slow breath. I've collapsed before, he said, without drama. I've lost balance. I've been overwhelmed. And most of the time, people don't notice because the show keeps going. That sentence landed heavily. The truth is, Michael continued, there are moments when I'm not dancing, not singing, not performing. He placed a hand over his chest. I'm just trying to stay standing. A collective inhale rippled through the crowd. Michael looked down briefly, then back up. His eyes shone under the lights, not with tears, but with honesty. The world sees strength, he said, but strength isn't never falling. Strength is when someone notices you might fall and gives you space. Behind the scenes, the band waited. No cue was given. No one dared interrupt. Michael took a few steps forward, slow and deliberate. Tonight, he said, something rare happened. Instead of rushing forward, instead of pushing closer, you stepped back. He nodded slightly. That saved me. The word stunned everyone, fans, crew, security alike. Michael let the silence breathe, allowing the weight of that statement to settle. There's a myth about me, he continued, that I'm untouchable, that I don't feel pain the way others do, that I exist somewhere above fear. He shook his head gently. I feel everything. The light softened even more, warming the stage in gold tones. When that fan shouted, Michael said, she wasn't calling me dangerous. She was warning everyone else that forgetting I'm human can be dangerous. A murmur of understanding moved through the audience. Not noise, but recognition. Michael smiled faintly. That's a big difference. He turned slightly to the side, pacing now, grounding himself in motion. I've had moments where love nearly hurt me, he admitted. Hands pulling, bodies rushing, hearts racing faster than reason. He stopped again, looking out over the vast sea of faces. But tonight, he said, you chose restraint. Michael placed a microphone briefly against his chest, as if anchoring himself. That choice told me something, he said, that this wasn't just a crowd. He pointed gently outward. This was a community. The word lingered in the air. He straightened his posture, not as a performer preparing for the next number, but as a man who had been heard. I want you to remember this, Michael said, not because it's about me, but because it's about how we treat people we admire. He lifted a finger slightly. Admiration should never erase empathy. A few fans wiped their eyes openly now. Michael nodded once more, then turned toward the band. Let's continue, he said softly. The first notes of the next song began, not loud, not explosive, but intimate. A song about vulnerability, about being seen. As he sang, the lyrics felt transformed. Every word carried the memory of what had just happened, of silence, of space, of care. Michael moved less, but each gesture felt intentional. Each step was measured. His voice, usually soaring, was restrained, controlled, deeply emotional. The audience followed him instinctively, swaying instead of jumping, listening instead of shouting. For the rest of the song, something extraordinary happened. No one tried to touch him. No one pushed forward. No one reached out past the boundary he had set, and Michael noticed. At the song's end, he didn't bow immediately. Instead, he stood still, eyes closed, absorbing the moment. When he opened them, he spoke one last time before the show moved on. "This," he said quietly, "is what respect feels like." The applause that followed was not explosive. It was steady, unified, profound. Michael smiled, not the polished smile of an icon, but the relieved smile of someone who felt safe. As the lights shifted and the show continued, everyone in that arena understood something deeply important. They hadn't just witnessed a concert. They had witnessed a moment where empathy changed the outcome, and that understanding would stay with them long after the music faded. Backstage, the air felt different. The moment Michael stepped off the stage, the usual rush did not happen. No frantic assistants. No overlapping voices. No urgent instructions being shouted over one another. Instead, there was a quiet stillness, an unspoken agreement among everyone present that something important had just occurred. Michael walked slowly down the corridor, towel draped over his shoulders, his breathing controlled but heavy. Sweat clung to his temples, not from exertion alone, but from the emotional weight he had carried back into the wings. One of the stage managers started to speak, then stopped. Another crew member simply nodded, stepping aside to give Michael space. No one touched him. Michael noticed. He always noticed. Inside his dressing room, he closed the door gently, not locking it, just sealing himself off from a noise. He sat down on the edge of the chair, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely together. For a long moment, he stared at the floor. What had happened out there replayed in his mind. Not the scream, not the words themselves, but what followed. The way the crowd paused. The way thousands of people collectively chose restraint instead of instinct. That choice stayed with him. Michael leaned back, exhaling slowly. His chest still felt tight, but his thoughts were clear. Most nights after a scare, his body reacted before his mind did. Shaking hands, racing heart, an urge to retreat completely. But tonight was different. Tonight, the fear had been interrupted before it could take hold. Not erased, interrupted. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," Michael said. A long-time security member stepped inside, careful, respectful. "Are you okay?" Michael nodded. "Yes," he said honestly. "I am." The guard hesitated. That moment out there, we've never seen anything like it. Michael offered a small smile. "Neither have I." When the man left, Michael stood and walked toward the mirror. He looked at his reflection. Pale, tired, eyes still bright with intensity. The face the world knew. The face that often became a symbol instead of a person. Tonight, he saw something else. Someone who had been protected. He touched his chest lightly, just over his heart, grounding himself. "I felt it," he whispered, though no one else was there. They felt it too. Later that night, after the concert ended and the arena emptied, the story began to travel faster than any official report. Crew members spoke quietly. Fans messaged each other. Videos circulated, not of panic, not of chaos, but of stillness. People commented on the silence, the restraint, the respect. Michael sat in his hotel room hours later, lights dimmed, a cup of tea cooling untouched on the table beside him. He watched a short clip someone had sent him. The audio wasn't clear, but the body language was unmistakable. The crowd stepping back, the hands lowering, the space opening. Michael closed the video and set the phone down. His throat tightened, not with fear this time, but with something closer to gratitude. For most of his life, love had come to him like a wave, powerful, overwhelming, sometimes dangerous. People loved him loudly, desperately, without limits. And while he understood the emotion behind it, the cost had always been high. Tonight, love had looked different. Tonight, love had been careful. The next morning, headlines began to appear. Most focused on the phrase that had been shouted. Many misinterpreted it. Some sensationalized it. Others mocked it. But Michael wasn't reading the headlines. He was thinking about the silence. At rehearsal the following day, the atmosphere remained subdued. The band played softer between sets. Dancers moved with awareness, watching him more closely than usual. During a break, one of the younger dancers finally spoke up. "Mr. Jackson, when everything went quiet last night, were you scared?" Michael considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said, "for a moment." The dancer nodded. "But you didn't look afraid." Michael smiled gently. "That's because I wasn't alone." Those words spread quietly through the room. Over the next weeks, something subtle but lasting changed in his shows. The energy remained electric, the excitement just as intense, but there was a new understanding between him and the audience. Fans waited for cues instead of rushing forward. Security adjusted protocols. Even the choreography evolved, creating natural distances that felt intentional rather than restrictive. Michael noticed how his body responded. He slept better. He breathed easier. He trusted the crowd in a way he never fully had before. One evening, during another concert, he paused mid-song, not because of danger, but because he felt overwhelmed again. This time, he didn't have to say anything. The audience instinctively lowered their voices. That was when Michael realized a moment from that first night had become something larger. It had taught people how to love him safely, and it had taught him something too. That asking for space did not mean rejecting love. That vulnerability did not weaken the connection. It deepened it. That being human on stage did not diminish the magic. It made it real. Late one night, Michael wrote a few lines in a notebook he carried with him everywhere. Not lyrics, just thoughts. "I don't need silence because I'm fragile. I need silence because it lets me stay." He closed the notebook and placed it beside his bed. As he turned off the light, one final thought settled in his mind. The most powerful moment of the night hadn't been the music, the movement, or the lights. It had been the instant when thousands of people chose care over impulse. And that choice stayed with him. On every stage, in every city, long after the scream was forgotten. What followed was not fear. It was trust. In the days that followed, the moment refused to fade. It didn't disappear the way concert incidents usually do, swallowed by the next headline, replaced by a louder spectacle. Instead, it lingered. People kept talking about it not because something terrible had happened, but because something rare had not happened. No stampede, no panic, no chaos, just restraint. Michael felt it everywhere he went. At airports, fans stood back instead of rushing forward. Outside hotels, voices lowered when he appeared tired. Even the way people looked at him had changed, not with less admiration, but with more awareness. They were seeing him differently, not as a symbol to be reached at all costs, not as a myth immune to fear, but as a human being whose safety mattered. One evening, sitting alone in a quiet room after rehearsal, Michael reflected on how strange that felt. For most of his life, danger had come disguised as love. People meant well, but their intensity had often crossed invisible lines. He had learned to live braced for impact, always expecting the moment when adoration would turn into something uncontrollable. That night on stage had rewritten that expectation. It showed him that people could love him without consuming him, and that realization settled deeply inside his chest. Michael began to speak about it, carefully, softly, never dramatically, in small conversations, in quiet moments with dancers, musicians, crew members. "Love doesn't have to hurt," he told one assistant. "Sometimes it just needs to listen." The assistant nodded, tears in her eyes, because she understood exactly what he meant. The fan who had shouted those words was never identified. No interviews, no spotlight, no attempt to claim credit. And Michael was grateful for that. Whoever they were, they had acted from instinct, not from a desire to be seen. And that made all the difference. In a way, it felt right that the moment belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. Weeks later, during another performance, Michael stood at center stage under a single light. The crowd was massive, tens of thousands of people, but the energy was calm, focused. He paused, letting the silence stretch just a little longer than usual. "You're very gentle tonight," he said softly into the microphone. A wave of quiet laughter rippled through the arena. "I feel it," he continued, "and I thank you for it." No explanation followed. None was needed. The applause that came afterward wasn't explosive. It was warm, sustained, respectful. Backstage, a veteran crew member who had worked concerts for decades shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen a crowd like this," he said. "They're not less excited. They're just aware." Michael smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." Over time, the story took on a life of its own. People analyzed it. Psychologists commented on it. Fans debated what it meant. But Michael never tried to control the narrative. He let it be what it was. A reminder, a lesson, a pause in a world that rarely slowed down. In private, Michael understood something even more personal. That night had healed a small but important fracture inside him. The belief that he was always 1 second away from being overwhelmed. It gave him permission to relax his guard, to breathe, to stay present. One late night, after returning from a show, he stood by a window overlooking the city. Lights stretched endlessly below, each one representing someone with their own thoughts, fears, and choices. He thought about how quickly fear spreads, and how rarely calm does. But when it does, it's powerful. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "They chose care." That choice mattered more than any applause. Years from now, people would still talk about Michael Jackson performances, the precision, the artistry, the magic. But those who truly understood him would also remember something quieter. The night when nothing happened. The night when a crowd proved that love could be safe. The night when silence protected instead of threatened. For Michael, that night became a private anchor. Whenever anxiety crept in, whenever memories of past chaos resurfaced, whenever the weight of being seen by millions felt unbearable, he remembered the stillness. He remembered the space. He remembered that people had listened. And in remembering, he found peace. Not because the world had changed completely, but because, for one crucial moment, it had changed enough. Enough to show that even in the loudest places, compassion can speak louder than fear. Enough to prove that being careful is not the opposite of love, but its highest form. And that was a lesson Michael carried with him. Long after the lights went out, long after the arena emptied, long after the echo of music faded into memory. A lesson born not from spectacle, but from silence.